on Blue Sky right now, where I am Lawrence O'Donnell, all one word, all those letters jammed together, MSNBC.com. And it's really fun to be over here in Blue Sky in a world of social media sanity. It's a whole new feeling. Haven't had that feeling for quite a while. Rachel, thank you so much for doing the math. Hardest thing to do in the news business, but the math on these deportation flights. I was looking at this, and seeing military aircraft, and then in the story I'd read, oh, there's like 82 people. I go, wait a minute, you don't need that giant thing. This is a stunt, and of course you've demonstrated that so well tonight. That this is really just show business deportation.
You can put 85 tons in a C-17. If you have a C-17 take off with 80 people in it, you are setting a gigantic pile of money on fire. And that is what they're doing, and pledging to do it every day, and pledging to use C-130s in addition to C-17s, which are an order of magnitude more expensive than that. And it is not because they are stuffed full of 85 tons worth of people. They are purely doing this for what it looks like while saying they need more money. And it's just, I mean, it's, even if you like what they're doing with deportations, there's absolutely no possible justification for why they need to spend this much taxpayer money just for the photo op.
Well, I think I know how Chris Hayes is going to explain this to me later in this hour tonight when he comes on to discuss this great new book. Got to make sure it's done.
Oh, it is great.
I think he's going to tell us these planes are about attention. They're about grabbing our attention to deportation. That's the argument he makes in this brilliant book about how we use our attention. He's written a book, Rachel, how dare he, about the inner workings of our minds.
I know. I love the book. I have read it. I'm going to talk to him about it as well. I know the pub date is tomorrow. Yeah. I will tell you, Lawrence, when I was reading Chris's book, when I first got the galley of it, when I was about 3 chapters into it, I actually stopped reading, put it down, went to my closet, dug out my old record player, and took out my record player and put on a vinyl record, so as to make my brain calm down enough and get out of digital space enough that I could calmly take in what Chris was telling me about our attention and the way that digital life has rewired our brains so that we can't focus on anything without wanting to skip to the next thing. It was like I needed to give myself therapy in order to get through it, and I'm very glad that I did.
Well, I'm going to explain to Dr. Hayes tonight what I do on weekends in my attention management regime, and see if he approves of that. I'm going to give you a hint. It's an incredibly lazy choice. And so, but I think he's going to approve based on what I've read in the book.
Well, I've got a bunch of old weird vinyl that I can share with you if you want to use my therapy choice too, Lawrence.
I should try that. We'll try that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Well, the right-wing Trump-supporting website, The Daily Caller, ran a happy headline for them saying that Donald Trump, as president, takes more questions than Joe Biden did as president, and they're right. They are very right to use the verb takes instead of the verb answers. Donald Trump takes more questions publicly than any president in history, but he answers fewer questions than any president in history, because a lie is not an answer. To be a member of the White House press corps now is to become practiced in taking Donald Trump dictation of lies, which Donald Trump does with a casual confidence, knowing that the White House press corps will never scream at him the way they could scream at Joe Biden whenever they felt like it, whenever they had a chance, whenever they were close enough. And so when Donald Trump told his lies about firing 18 inspectors general late on Friday night, happened late on Friday night, he didn't tell his lies till later in the weekend, the White House press corps could do nothing but write down the lies and report them. Donald Trump, in effect, said that he had no personal knowledge of why he fired the inspectors general. He said, quote, "Some people thought that some were unfair or some were not doing the job." It's entirely possible that some people who Donald Trump talks to thought that some unnamed inspectors general were unfair. But who are those people who thought that? And what was the unfairness they imagined? There was no chance, zero chance, of getting any answers about that when Donald Trump told the White House press corps the lie that it was, quote, a very standard thing to do. They all reported that quote, and the good ones would say in the next line, as the New York Times did, that is not true. Richard Nixon was the most corrupt president in history prior to Donald Trump, and after Republican Richard Nixon's corruption forced him to resign from office in 1974, Congress spent the next few years coming up with ways to prevent the next Richard Nixon. One of those anti-Nixon, anti-corruption ideas was the creation of inspectors general in the government departments. Richard Nixon corrupted the Justice Department to the point that his Attorney General, John Mitchell, went to prison. And so to shore up the integrity of the Justice Department, there would now be an Inspector General of the Department of Justice and of every other department in the government. Richard Nixon abused the Internal Revenue Service by ordering tax audits of people on his enemies list. Congress then made that illegal and created an Inspector General in the Treasury Department to keep an eye on that. The Inspector General Act of 1978 passed the United States Senate unanimously, zero opposition. And one of the things that Republicans really loved about it was that inspectors general were charged with investigating waste, fraud, and abuse in every department of the government. Waste, fraud, and abuse was one of the Republican battle cries that Ronald Reagan was using then in what would become his successful campaign to be the next president of the United States. And Republican senators of that era were as outraged and offended by Republican President Richard Nixon's corruption as Democratic senators were. Outrage at presidential crime did not become partisan until the Trump era. After the corruption and impeachments and indictments of Donald Trump, Congress once again turned to the Inspector General law to try to add a defense against the next Donald Trump, who turned out to be Donald Trump. In 2022, Congress added specifics to the section referring to presidential removal of an inspector general, saying that a president needed to provide 30 days notice to Congress of the intention to remove an inspector general and provide, quote, substantive rationale, including detailed and case-specific reasons. Donald Trump didn't do either of those things when he did his late night Friday night firings, and so Donald Trump could not finish his first week as president of the United States without violating the law.
Do you think he violated the law?
Well, technically, yeah, but he has the authority to do it.
Sorry, but it's really one of the other. It's either technically, yeah, or he has the authority to do it. It cannot be both. Senator Graham got it right the first time. Technically, yeah. Donald Trump violated the law. Republican Senator Susan Collins was willing to portray herself as the only adult in Maine without enough common sense to figure out what Donald Trump was actually doing. She said, I don't understand why one would fire individuals whose mission is to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. So this leaves a gap in what I know is a priority for President Trump. One of the inspectors general, Hannibal Ware, said this.
Well, the reason is actually the most alarming part. The reason was due to changing priorities of the administration. And the reason that is alarming is because IGs are not a part of any administration. IGs oversee how the priorities of the administration is being conducted to make sure that there's transparency in government and to make sure that there's no fraud, waste, and abuse in how taxpayer funds are being expended. We're looking at what amounts to a threat to democracy, a threat to independent oversight, and a threat to transparency in government. This is the statute isn't just a technicality. It's a key protection of IG independence, is what it is. And just like you referenced, just over 2 years ago, these things were put in to strengthen our independence, not to weaken it and treat it as if it's a technicality.
The oldest member of the United States Senate, Republican Chuck Grassley of Iowa, used to consider himself, maybe still does consider himself, a champion of inspectors general. And his enthusiasm for inspectors general was so contagious that the junior senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst, joined him in helping to create a bipartisan team of senators whose plan, until this weekend anyway, was to strongly support inspectors general. Chuck Grassley is a Republican senator who I used to fully respect when I was the staff director of the Senate Finance Committee for the Democratic chairman, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and Senator Grassley was one of the Republican members of that committee. Chuck Grassley then was always a predictable vote because his positions were based on Republican Party principles of that time, including his very strong stance, along with all Republicans then, against tariffs in the committee that has jurisdiction over tariffs. Senator Grassley usually, but not always, voted against what Democrats were trying to do on the committee, and I never once questioned the motivation for his vote or the motivation of any of the Republican senators who voted against what the Democrats were trying to do. If anyone other than Donald Trump did a midnight mass firing of inspectors general, you would have seen that Chuck Grassley, who I knew and worked with, all over television, condemning that presidential action and immediately calling for an investigation in each committee of the Senate about the workings of those inspectors general. But 91-year-old Chuck Grassley has changed positions or silenced himself on so many issues, including tariffs in the Trump era, that it comes as no surprise that the most he was willing to come up with after something I know he deeply objects to was this statement. There may be good reason the IGs were fired. We need to know that, if so. I'd like further explanation from President Trump. Regardless, the 30-day detailed notice of removal that the law demands was not provided to Congress. Releasing that written statement meant that Chuck Grassley didn't have to handle the question Lindsey Graham had to handle. Was it illegal? I really miss the pre-Trump Chuck Grassley. There were times when I thought of Chuck Grassley as, in Senate terms at least, courageous in his consistency. And I personally disagreed with the policies he was so consistently supporting. Mark Greenblatt was the Inspector General of the Department of Interior until this weekend.
The key question here is who does the president appoint in the place of the IGs that he's removed? We are we're so-called watchdogs inside the federal agencies. So does he appoint true watchdogs or does he appoint lapdogs? If a member of the Trump administration is accused of ethics misconduct or some sort of criminal violation, will the IG be willing to investigate that in a fulsome and comprehensive manner? Will they be willing to come to findings, negative findings about that Trump political appointee? That is the key question.
And so this morning, thanks to Donald Trump, when Pete Hegseth reported to work at the Pentagon today for the first time as Secretary of Defense, he had the pleasure of knowing, as he entered the building, that he wouldn't have to go through the metal detector, and there was no inspector general left in the Pentagon. No one in the Pentagon empowered to investigate Pete Hegseth.
The American people, if we don't have good and independent inspector generals, are going to see the swamp refill They're going to see rampant waste, fraud. They're going to see corruption. It may be the president's goal here, when he's got a meme coin that's making him billions, is to remove anyone that's going to call the public attention to his malfeasance.
Joining us now is Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. She's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Senator, you remember the Chuck Grassley before Donald Trump, the Chuck Grassley who would have been all over this before Donald Trump.
Well, as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Grassley has an opportunity to still stand up on this. And I hope he, Senator Ernst, other Republicans who respect whistleblowers, have supported whistleblowers through multiple administrations will do that. Because as you have pointed out, this middle of the night purge of these government watchdogs who protect our taxpayer money was a complete abuse of power. Thinking of all these agencies, you point out the Department of Defense, where you can now have kickbacks, no one's watching over it. Will contracts be awarded to the actual lowest contract? No one's watching it over it. And while Donald Trump's friends may be able to pad their pockets, there is going to be no one watching over for the cost for everyday Americans. So there is a straight line, as you know, between corruption, chaos, and cost for Americans. And that's why we are standing up against this. The fact that these people, they reported to work this morning. Lawrence. They were doing their jobs. And that 30-day notice was put in there by Chuck Grassley and others so that the Congress, the equal branch of government to the executive branch, could stand up and say, wait a minute, this is wrong.
What happens next? Are these firings in effect? It sounds like some of them didn't show up today. It isn't clear to me.
Well, obviously, we've got to join with some of these Republicans if they're willing to join with us. Otherwise, we're going to do it on our own and push this issue. It was a clear violation of the law in two ways. Not the 30-day notice. That may sound small, but I think your calm viewers, after reading Chris Hayes' book tomorrow, understand that this hair on fire moment has to be handled methodically. This was against the law, and it also, that he didn't give the reasons for doing it. This reason that we have changing priorities. What? Changing priorities from this Inspector General Act that says we've got to root out fraud, corruption, and kickbacks and bribes. Of course, that's got to be a priority of the United States Congress, no matter who's running it. So we will continue to push this, push for reappointments of these people, and push our Republican colleagues to actually stand up against fraud and abuse.
And Senator, this idea that, just to underline it, that, we need inspectors general who agree with the president's agenda. There's not supposed to be an agenda in an inspector general's office.
They are independent. They are bipartisan. They have gone after fraud and abuse and kickbacks and bribes under both Republican and Democratic administrations, and that's why they are set up the way they were. And Senator Grassley was actually in Congress before this law even passed and understands how important it is. This is a full-out purge. This isn't just one or two people that they felt weren't doing their jobs. What they did here is they did an all-out purge and literally stated in an email that it didn't fit with their changing priorities. I think that rooting out bribes and kickbacks and padding people's pockets because they get kickbacks, whether it's defense contractors, whether it's with Health and Human Services, all of these under various administrations, things have been found out and taxpayer money has been saved. Brookings Institute, if you remember one number, remember this. Every dollar invested in inspectors general has brought back $13 to the American taxpayers.
Yeah, it's like money invested in IRS agents. It's a profit center. Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you very much for starting off our discussion tonight.
Great to be on. Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. Coming up today, Donald Trump fired or tried to fire all of the career prosecutors at the Justice Department who worked on Jack Smith's investigations of Donald Trump. That's next with former federal prosecutors Andrew Weissman and Brendan Ballou. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is trying to get a vote in the Senate this week on a simple one-word resolution. Resolved that the Senate disapproves of any pardons for individuals who are found guilty of assaulting Capitol Police officers. Couldn't be simpler. A resolution disapproving of the pardons of the people found guilty of assaulting Capitol Police officers. All 47 Democrats in the Senate support that resolution, and it might even pick up a Republican vote or two.
I fear that you will get more violence. Pardoning the people who went into the Capitol and beat up a police officer violently, I think was a mistake, because it seems to suggest that's an okay thing to do.
On Thursday, our next guest, Brendan Ballou, resigned from the Justice Department after serving as a prosecutor of January 6 defendants. In an essay for the New York Times, he described the prosecution of Jaleese and Mark Middleton, a married couple from Texas who proudly announced on Facebook, "We fought the cops." One moment from their trial has stuck with me. Sitting in the courtroom in the awkward minutes before their verdict was announced, I noticed that Mr. Middleton was wearing Trump socks with the president's face stitched into the side. That small sign of fealty struck me as incredibly sad. The Middletons were ready to go to prison for a man who quite likely didn't care about them at all. Today, Donald Trump, through his acting Attorney General James McHenry, fired prosecutors who worked on Jack Smith's cases against Donald Trump. The New York Times reports acting Attorney General James McHenry on Monday fired more than a dozen prosecutors who worked on the 2 criminal investigations into Donald J. Trump for the special counsel Jack Smith, saying they could not be trusted to faithfully implement the president's agenda, a Justice Department spokesman said. Justice Department veterans called the firings an egregious violation of well-established laws meant to preserve the integrity and professionalism of government agencies. What made it all the more jarring, current and former officials said, was that such a momentous and aggressive step was initiated by an obscure acting attorney general operating on behalf of a president with a stated desire for vengeance and few advisors with the stature or inclination to restrain him. The department did not name the fired prosecutors, but a person who worked with some members of Mr. Smith's team said many of the dismissals appeared to target career lawyers and most likely violated civil service protections for non-political employees. In the letters to the prosecutors, which were transmitted electronically on Monday afternoon, Mr. McHenry claimed that Mr. Trump had constitutional authority over personnel matters under Article 2 of the Constitution to fire career staff members. And the email said, given your significant role in prosecuting the president, I do not believe that the leadership of the department can trust you to assist in implementing the president's agenda faithfully, the firing memo said. Joining our discussion now is former federal prosecutor Brendan Ballou, who worked on the prosecutions of 6 January 6 defendants. He resigned from the Justice Department last week. Also with us, Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and MSNBC legal analyst. Andrew, I want to begin with you on these firings and saying in an email, a Justice Department email to a career Justice Department official, we don't trust you with the president's agenda in a department that is not supposed to carry the president's agenda.
So you're absolutely right. So if it came to the president's policy positions, for instance, the president saying, I want you to focus on drugs, or I want you to focus on the border, that's fine. But a position which is prosecute these people and not those people, that is the norm that Republican and Democratic administrations post-Watergate adhered to, precisely because that maintains our democracy. You do not want any president to be able to do that. The idea that you have the acting attorney general, that is the head law enforcement officer, sending out that email and starting his career off by doing something that by all appearances violates the civil service protections on the theory of if the president says it, that's legal. You know very well a president who said that, who had to resign from office. Here, there's civil service protections for career people for very good reasons. This is so much in keeping with your segment with Senator Klobuchar. It is really sort of the beginning of the end of the rule of law with, the DOJ purge that is going on.
So they will sue. What will they do?
So if you're a career prosecutor who has not been fired for cause, this does not appear to have any of the indicia for cause at all. You can bring a lawsuit. I don't envy these people. That's not why you went to the Department of Justice to bring a civil suit. Just like Andy McCabe, who was the acting head of the FBI, he did the same thing and he won his lawsuit. These people, it seems to me,
and he got back pay.
He gets back pay, et cetera. But from Donald Trump's perspective, the message is sent out, their lives are hurt. The message to all other people is to toe the line, or else you're not put in this position. But yes, I think these people have a very good lawsuit. I think they will, get back pay and, their names sort of reinstated in terms of, their being noble and good career servants. But the damage is already done. But just to put a fine point on it, this is the acting attorney general of the United States who took this step. That is the head law enforcement officer who's doing something that completely violates, in my view, civil service rules.
Pam Bondi has to be very happy that she hasn't had her final Senate confirmation vote yet, so she didn't have to do this.
It's on someone else's watch, absolutely.
Brendan, you were still working in the Justice Department on Monday when the pardons were issued. What was that like for you in the building that day? Where were you the moment you heard about the pardons? What did you feel?
Obviously it was a devastating moment for anybody that was working on these prosecutions for years. And I should say that obviously I was a small part of a very large effort. But my first thought was not so much about the prosecutors in these cases, but the victims. I think that this administration would like to characterize this as a fight between the president and the prosecutors, but I don't think that's a fair characterization. What this is really a fight is between the president and the victims of January 6th, the officers who were attacked, who were dragged into crowds, who were maced, who were killed. And the president's agenda kind of depends on those people being forgotten.
And it seems an attack on the judgments made by the judges in this case, including many statements they made during sentencing.
Absolutely. It was interesting. All the prosecutions happened in the District of Columbia, and the judges that we worked with became intimately familiar with the attack on the Capitol, knowing very specific parts of the building, individual officers and so forth. I think at some level, they too were emotionally involved in what happened that day. So you see that in some of the statements that judges are making, even as they dismiss some of these cases, saying that the memory of January 6th can't be forgotten. And I think it's important for not only former prosecutors to be saying that, but for judges on the bench.
So you stayed after the Trump inauguration. What I'm now going to say is all the way to Thursday, which is like a long run for someone who was already there. Did it feel like day to day a firing order might come?
Oh, absolutely. As soon as the orders were coming in on Monday, it was obvious, at least for me personally, that my tenure there was very limited. And you were seeing news unfold by the hour as the new leadership at the U.S. Attorney's Office came in. I think, as Andrew said, this is a real attempt at attacking the integrity and independence of the Justice Department, and in a broader sense, the entire rule of law. So I think the work that you guys are doing to draw attention to this is really important, because it's the only way we're going to stop it.
Brendan Ballou, thank you for your service, and I know people in our audience want to thank you too. Andrew Weissman, thank you for joining our discussion.